friends. This week we have Eimear Burke, who is first and foremost a lovely, delightful person. It was really just a delight to have her on the podcast. Me and Seb really enjoyed it. I guess to describe her, first and foremost, she's an Irish woman, a mother, a psychologist, and a druid. In fact, she is the current chief of order of bards, ovates, and druids. What's a druid? What does it all entail? What's it all about? Let's find out. Eimear Burke, welcome to the Earth of the Delights podcast. What's the crack? How are you keeping?
Very well, thank you. I'm sitting here, in my house in Kilkenny, looking out on a very dull, damp, typical, February day in Ireland. I've just been out picking some snowdrops, so it's warm, but just damp and dull. Otherwise, I'm okay, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks. Finding the present lockdown and weather quite difficult, but trying my best to take it day by day. To begin with, Eimear, we usually ask our guests to tell us a bit about themselves. We know it's one of the hardest questions to be asked, but it is a requirement of our guests.
Oh my God, that's a really hard question because it's it's such a broad, open question. Well, I'm Irish and I live in Ireland, and I don't live in the land of my birth. I was born in the Midlands in Offaly, and I moved about 25 years ago to Kilkenny, and it has adopted me. And it's a place that I'm very much connected to now. Although I was born in Offaly, I defected to Dublin. I hear your Dublin accent, and I said I'd never go back to rural Ireland again, having escaped. And I lived there for 23 years, and then I moved, having lived a double life between Dublin and Kilkenny for 4 years, and realized I was not getting the best of both, but I was getting the least of both. And then I decided to move to Kilkenny, and I have never looked back. So I live in a beautiful place called Three Castles, and I have a Norman Tower, which is one of the castles. My house is another one. It doesn't look like it. It was an old rectory built in 1790 around a tower house. So, and we don't know where the third castle is. There are many possibilities. So I look over the River Nore in a lovely place, six miles from Kilkenny City. So I'm very fortunate to be living where I am, and particularly in this time of pandemic, where I'm looking at nature. I'm able to go for a walk in the woods, and although I'm isolated, but I'm not alone because I'm I suppose I've got the landscape to support me.
That's beautifully said, Eimear. I really love that perspective. I'm reminded of a Charles Eisenstein quote who said that we are never alone on Mother Earth. Really, such a beautiful understanding of our time here, which I'm sure we'll explore shortly. But I have to ask, what brought you to Kilkenny?
Love, that's the long answer. I met my husband. He passed away 6 years ago, Howard, and he was living here, and we met. And because I said I had defected from rural Ireland, I was never going back again. So we decided to live half and half between the two, Dublin and Kilkenny, thinking it would be wonderful to have a city life and a country life. Um, and we had when our son was 2, we decided, no, I'm going to move. So I decided I'm going to move, and we live in Kilkenny full time. And it's been just wonderful, a lovely experience. And to be able to bring up our 2 children in rural Ireland is great. Very, very fortunate. So that's what brought me to Kilkenny. And I now belong here.
Wonderful. Am I right in saying you spent considerable time in Africa as well?
I first went to Africa in 1982. I was a nurse originally, and I went out working as a nurse there to save the world. And as you can see, I didn't do a good job of saving the world. It's still in a mess. But I went out there in 1982, and very idealistic, of course. And my father died during that time, so I came back after 15 months, and that's where I met my first husband. And then in the late 80s, I went to Lesotho with him for over 3 years. So I lived there again. And then I started going to Tanzania in the mid 90s. And for 20 years, every year went there teaching. And in the meantime, my first husband and I separated, and I met my second husband, Howard, So he came with me and our two children, and we built a house there, a shack. We became very friendly with the healer there, who offered us, said, "Why don't you build a house?" And we did. And it's a long story. So we worked with him as a healer, videoing his work, presenting it at conferences. That was the extracurricular bit to my teaching. It had nothing to do with the teaching, but so we would go for about 7 weeks at a time. And then he and his wife separated. So he says he was leaving. So he said, "Take the house with you." So we took the house down. It was built using the Bernie Siegel method, where you just bolt everything, so you can unscrew everything, and you leave no mark. So we took it with us. We had another friend, a Tanzanian, who had a site with no house. Of course, we had a house with no site. So we said, "Can we put it there?" So it's essentially her house, and if I go to visit, then I stay there, but it's really hers. So I stopped teaching there in 2014. The course ended, and I've been back once as a visit. Yeah. So Tanzania holds, I suppose, a special place in my heart because I've got close friends there who are Tanzanians, and we're in regular contact. And my friends had a family wedding in December and January, to which I was invited. And they invited me in the summer, and I thought, that's crazy. With COVID, nobody's going to have any wedding, but they did, because the pandemic left. And they were sending me videos and photographs. But COVID has come back again, but still not in a bad, well, maybe we don't know how it's going to pan out. But so I'm still very, very close to two families in Tanzania.
And is that did your trips in Africa, did they kind of kickstart your love for nature?
I suppose it was always there. Okay, my father was a tree planter. Sorry, that wasn't his living, but he was a great lover of trees. And I remember helping him, and with my siblings, digging holes to plant trees in the garden. And I remember I loved the mythology of the landscape and the land, which I got in primary school. But when I went to Turkana, that was in the north of Kenya, I became really interested in native herbs. I wasn't allowed to use it because it was like I'm a primary healthcare worker. Leave that alone. But my watchman had a great knowledge of local herbs, so we'd sit and converse about various herbs. And then when I went to Lesotho, I got involved in a healing group, and that started that, I suppose, a more ancient indigenous spiritual ways of looking at the world, and it resonated with me.
Yeah.
And then when I went to Tanzania, I became very friendly with Shaban, this healer, and I found it fascinating. And I'd done some work with a Native American medicine woman as well. Again, resonances, but my frustration was they weren't from my landscape. So if you're talking about, white buffalo calf woman, or I'd had initiations in Africa with African ancestors, it's their trees from their land, their landscape. And I thought, I'm here in Ireland. How do I get it that it becomes my own, or I can really, really integrate it rather than being maybe a visitor or a spectator? And Shaban, our healer friend, he spent 3 summers with us. We were doing this African Celtic workshops. And I remember the first day he came, I picked him up at the airport, and we were in a bookshop in Dublin. And this book popped out called The Modern Day Druidery by Cassandra Eason. And I thought, I'm going to get this. And it was around, you can be a druid anywhere, in an apartment with 4 pot plants, that's your grove. And it was really pragmatic. You can be on your own, you can be with a group of people. And she mentioned at the back of the book, Obod, the Order of Bards, Ovids, and Druids, which is the order I belong to, and I'm the chief now. And she recommended it. So I went online and signed up, and I've never looked back. And the interesting thing is I started my Druidery, and with the gwers, the teachings that you get a ritual to follow the wheel of the year. And we were running a workshop, Howard Shaban and I, and it was the autumn equinox. So we did the ritual, and Shaban said to me, "You've been given a key. Use it or the lock will get rusty." So in a way, I had only joined the order like little bit more than 10 minutes in, and here I was running a ritual,
Mm.
and he said, "You've got a key." So he gave me permission. So I've been running them ever since here. So it was really interesting. That African connection allowed me in some
Mm.
way to connect. And each year I would go to Tanzania. It used to be at Imulk, this time, and I would run an Imulk ceremony, which was really strange in that landscape. But the more I went there, the deeper my roots went in Ireland.
Right. Okay. And I wondered, I mean, you've just touched on it there about the Druidery. How could you explain to someone who, or to us who, we're not experts, what it means to be a Druid? Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of beliefs out there that maybe aren't true. Because when you say, when I said that, oh, I'm going to be interviewing a Druid next week, some of my friends had some, oh, really? Oh, don't they believe in this? Don't they believe in that? And I was like, well, actually, let me do my reading because I don't even know exactly what it is. And so I was wondering if you could kind of give us like I know it's a hard question, but a brief synopsis of what it means to be a druid.
Well, you're going to get my take because
Okay.
there's an adage: if you ask 10 druids what Druidry is, you'll get 11 different answers. So, essentially, it is a nature-based spiritual path where we look to the landscape and the seasons as a metaphor for our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And we follow that by marking them, doing rituals, for example, or engaging with the landscape, marking the wheel of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a non-dogmatic spiritual path. We don't have a big book. We don't have dogmatic teachings, and we embrace, a diverse cohort of people. So you can be a Christian and a Druid, a pagan and a Druid, an
Ah.
atheist, a Druid, Muslim. It doesn't matter, because what joins us is our love of nature. So central with Druidry, we have three strands: a bardic, a novate, and a druidic strand. The bardic strand is around the storytelling, the history keeping. The ovate is the healer, shamanic strand. And then the druid strand is more like the philosophical, the teacher. So what unites us is creativity, the pursuit of creativity and inspiration from the landscape. We call it Awen in Welsh, or Imas in Irish. Being able to engage with the other world,
Mm-hmm.
past, the present, and the future, and the pursuit of wisdom. And that central to Druidry is, as a Druid, is one of service to the land, service to your community, and that notion of um, taking responsibility for your actions, looking at your actions through an ethical lens. Like I say, we don't have a big book, so we don't have a list of commandments. We don't have this notion of sin, but you live from your own internal moral compass and you take responsibility for your actions.
Right.
We have that notion of the law of the harvest, what you sow, so you should reap. It sounds very biblical, but I think that's maybe a universal value that people have, corresponding maybe to karma. So, but it's that love of that nature. And what's really interesting, the Irish word for Druidry and magic is the same. It's druicht. So right through Druidry is that notion of magic, and it's not about manipulation and through spells. And we do have wands. I have a wand here made from bog pine. It's a wand I really like. We're not cursors or anything like that. A wand helps you to focus energy or focus thought and intention. So we manifest rather than summon, rather than manipulate.
Right.
So, and it's about tapping into the magic of the landscape. And we use the word in our ordinary everyday lives. We'll describe something as magic, and everybody will have a different notion of what magic means. But somehow you get that sense. You listen to a magical piece of music, or you look at a piece of art, and you go, "That is magic." Or you're looking at a magical sunset. That there's a sense that's pre-verbal or non-verbal that really catches you, that you engage with. And for me, that's what Druidry is about. And it's so much more. So you're asking me.
No. Yeah, that was a great answer.
Quick synopsis.
No, that was great.
I love this explanation of Druidry. But before we move into this, I just have to ask how you managed to balance the Western medical approach to health with what you were learning from your healing friend. Were there contradictions for you?
I don't think so. What it did was help me articulate what I already knew inside. So by the time one of the frustrations I had with the medical model, I had them as a nurse. And this is why I'm a psychologist now. So when I came back from Kenya, I studied psychology. So by the time I met Shaban, and when I went to Lesotho, I was a psychologist at that point. So what I was interested in was a more holistic approach to people and their well-being. So what this was, when I started in Lesotho meeting healers, and I joined a healing group, a healing and meditation group, and that's where I first heard about Glastonbury for the first time. I had never heard of Glastonbury. They're really interesting. I have to go so far to discover these things. But what they did was like it all resonated with me. It's almost like it confirmed something I knew deep down. So in a sense, it wasn't challenging. It just gave me confidence to engage with these ideas and say, actually, you know what? There's so much validity to this. This is what I have known, but I was never able to say. Does that make sense?
This really makes perfect sense to me. In fact, I resonate deeply with this statement because I often feel very similarly. When I started discovering many quote unquote alternative approaches to healing, my initial resistance usually dissipated after I opened up to listening to the rationale. The rationale usually being that we have emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental needs. And if these needs aren't attended to, we can experience a plethora of negative consequences. This makes sense to me. Splitting the mind from the body and the body from the environment, which we unfortunately see within the Western medical model, does not really make sense to me. Why do you think we are still disregarding many of the more traditional healing approaches?
I don't think we are now. I think they're coming back. But why did we do it in the past? I think maybe it was associated with lack of education or a lack of sophistication. So when we became industrialized and mechanized, etc., and we became allegedly more sophisticated, uh, and the way people spoke about science, that it kind of pushed away those old ways. Except science is now recognizing this, and I think with the modern world, with this need to be in control and to imagine that we are in control, like we do it through technology. And of course, this pandemic has told us we are not in control. We never have been, but that we had, a higher standard of living. I'm not talking about a higher quality of living, but a higher standard of living. Everything became mechanized and rational and logical. So therefore, the mystery was gone. And there is a huge craving, and there always has been, for mystery. We get it in stories, we get it in films, and Druidery is full of mystery, as is religion in many ways. But then there are people who are very authoritarian and who want certainty, and this is where the control comes in. So this is the way it is, and this is where fundamentalism comes in, because fundamentalist worldviews or dogma
Mm.
provide certainty, and even in the absence of evidence of that certainty, people still hold on to it. And uh, and I think that certainty, or that need for certainty, is being eroded. So people are now wanting to, because they find actually dogma hasn't helped, fundamentalism hasn't helped. It results in war and hatred and fighting and conflict. And then there are people kind of going, okay, there has to be more to life than this. So they're looking for meaning, and engaging then with mystery, as science does. There are aspects of science that now looking at recognizing there are phenomena that they cannot actually explain right now, but that doesn't mean they're not worth looking at. So we don't know how this works, but we see something here. Let's explore this further. So I belong to a scientific and medical network based in the UK, but it's a worldwide organization which looks at science and looks at mystery. And Howard and I, for many years, went to the Mystics and Scientists Conference. I'm blown away by this. So you'd have tree huggers and meteorologists and chemists and foresters and therapists and healers all coming together, not fighting, but coming with their different perspectives, to try and make sense or unpack the mystery. What is it that connects this? And that's a lovely environment to be in because we're not fighting. So you'll have physicists and you'll have mathematicians coming in there looking at consciousness.
Yeah. It's great that you say that actually, because we interviewed Lucy Jones, who wrote an article on Druidery,
Mhm.
and she's spoken a lot about her relationship with nature, and how it kind of she found all of this research about how the soil has an effect on your mental health, and this, that, and all things that you would kind of disregard if you went strictly by the book. And then we've got an interview coming out with Dr. Gaetan Chevalier, who is kind of like the founder of Earthing. And I've actually got an
Okay.
earthing mat here on my desk, which I use every day. Again, something that when I explain to my friends, you just say the tagline, like, oh, it's connecting with the Earth's energy. It sounds very woo woo. And
Yeah.
then when you kind of go into it more and you go, well, actually, the rubber of your souls and this and that and blah, blah, then my friends go, oh, actually, yeah, that does actually make kind of intrinsic sense. And then, before you know it, from being a naysayer, they've actually gone and bought themselves an earthing mat or wherever it may be. How do you think this belief and this connection with nature and the land has helped you, especially maybe now during COVID? Because a lot of people, they live in cities and maybe they don't have that connection. I mean, there's nice parks in cities and so on, but maybe they don't have that connection with nature. How has that helped you with kind of your mental health and your own spirituality?
Oh, it's helped enormously. And I remember at the first lockdown
Yeah.
because it happened, oh my God, almost a year ago. Hard to believe. For 15 years, I wasn't able to walk on the road outside my house because of traffic and everything stopped. And I went for a walk every day within my 2Ks. And I could do an audit every day of what was
Hmm.
in the hedgerows. And there was no dust, there was no pollution. It was, oh, I hadn't seen that plant before. And I found that actually just even doing an audit of what was there in terms of birds, plants, and I'd come back feeling quite high. I also have a bike, and sometimes I go cycling in the woods, but I come back
Mm,
quite high and just really buzzy because it's like I've gone into the woods where I'm upset, I'm angry, just really stressed. And I'll call to the trees and I'll say, give us a hand here. And I come out of the woods in the end and I'm, whew, that was great. I feel so much better. So it's like, and this is not something I believe, this
mm,
is something I know. So when you talk about the earth mat or the so-called woo-woo stuff, it's not about faith. It's about actually this is my experience. This is what I know happens to me when I go and spend time at the tree, or when I go and I walk in the woods, or when I'm out in my garden. I know what happens. I know the benefits. I
mm.
actually feel them. So it's been enormously helpful because after this interview now I go off to the woods again, and it's like my body craves it. It's like I get a bit. I
Mm.
need to go out. I need to go out, and then I come back in, and then everything is well. Because remember, with this pandemic, all we can do is control this present moment, is live in the now. We've always lived with uncertainty, but we had an illusion that we could plan and predict and all of that. And of course, this pandemic
Yeah.
tells us we cannot. And, um, we can't even maybe plan next week. I mean, that's how the future has been taken away from us. So it's a real lesson in living in the now. So I find nature helps me do that. Nature grows much slower. Trees uh, are slow beings, and it's around a reminder, just stop. All I can control right now is whether I take a sip of tea, whether I become more aware of my breath. Do I get up and go for a walk? And that in itself is really, really powerful because I can do things and I have a
Mm,
sense of agency. Because with all of this pandemic, is that people don't have a sense of agency. And even in the smallest things, what can I do? Even when the big things there are obstacles, but at least in the smallest thing. And that gives me a sense of, I suppose, a sense of consolation, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning is that I can
mm.
always make a choice. And it's about being in this moment
Yeah.
because that's all that matters.
Emer, this is so beautiful, and I'm sure many of our listeners will appreciate these reassuring, truth filled words. I still find myself slipping away from the present too often, but you're so right. This is all we have, and this is all we've ever had right now.
I want to ask about experience. You mentioned you know these things. It's not faith. But why do you think many of us have somewhat unexplainable experiences and still wait for external evidence to believe our own experience, our own knowing?
I'm going to go backwards. For the early part of my life, I didn't trust myself. And I have a very, very strong gut, as in it tells me things, but I ignored it because I was brought up, and I come from a Roman Catholic background, and Roman Catholics are brought up not to question, you just accept things. So it was like you could always be wrong, was the chant I heard. So always give the other person the benefit of the doubt because you could be wrong. And I, of course, I took that on in spades, which meant I was always wrong, even though my gut was telling me one thing, but other people might have been saying something else. And I did that to my cost, and it caused me a lot of damage. I've recovered. So I now know I am going to trust what I know. One example was, and this is not nature based, is we home educated our children. So my son has never been to school. He's now 22. And when my husband died, my daughter was 13. And I knew for the first year after he passed, I wasn't able to manage her home education myself. So I decided I was going to send her to a school. So this is going to school at 14 for the first time. And the only school that didn't make me churn when I looked on the websites was this Gaelscoil. So Irish language school. Quaylen didn't have Irish. But I knew this is the school. And I remember it was ringing them in June, just a week before the school closed, saying, can you let my daughter in September? And I don't know if you heard of people who, when their children are conceived, then they book them into a school. So I'm doing it just the last week of the previous term. And I had a meeting, and I have Irish, and I spoke to the principal, and she said, she doesn't have Irish and she doesn't have this. And I said, my instinct is telling me this is the right school. I know it is. I know it is. I know it is. Everything else, everything logically, rationally would have said, don't do this. Anyway, she got in. And it's been the best thing ever. And there was an example of where all evidence is saying, except my gut, and I trusted it. Now, I was scared. I was terrified. And it's worked out. So I know sometimes my gut will tell me, and I go, I'm going to listen. I'll hold on. I won't react immediately. And then in time, I realize, actually, I'm glad I listened to that. I'm glad I slowed down. I'm glad I didn't react. I just waited because it has unfolded that my instinct was telling me. Usually if it's like I cannot now do myself a disservice and not know. So, and I actually, because I'm older, I don't care what people think now. So if people think I'm woo woo and wacky because I'm talking to trees, so be it. And I'm lucky. I'm living in an Ireland now. There's nobody going to burn me at the stake or for. I actually find people are now more interested in Druidery. So when my husband died almost 6 years ago, we had the funeral in the Grove, in the garden. So there were about 200 people there, and he's buried next door in the graveyard. There's a graveyard beside the house. And he died at home here. And most of the people who came were Catholic, and they were just blown away by the ceremony, including a close friend who's a priest. He said, Eimear, he rang me a few days afterwards, and he said he was blown away, and he'd been telling his congregation about this Druid funeral he'd been to and said, this is how it should be done. So, and I've worked in a seminary for 27 years and in a development studies program. That's how I went to Tanzania. And none of the priests or nuns, or I've taught nuns and priests and lay people, and none of them have ever criticized me, dissed me, or anything. They've been fascinated with what I do. Because it's nature-based, there's no dogma, because you can hold both. So I suppose that's my long answer. Sorry if I'm rambling on.
No, it's great. I'm really glad that you brought up language, actually, because that's something that intrigued me, and it's something ever since I got to know Jim. I'm a bit of a language nerd, basically. My dad's Italian, so I was brought up bilingual, and I've moved out to Spain, and I studied Spanish throughout my whole school career and at university, and I love just picking up, even if it's just a little word. Even doing the research, I'm not sure if I might butcher this word here, but that a woman, a female kind of druid is a bandry. Is that right?
Bondry, yeah.
Bandry, yeah. So these little things, but what I find really interesting about Ireland is, and it's not alone in this example, but a lot of Irish people, they don't speak Irish. And we know the history. Probably a lot of people. I try not to offend anyone here as an English person saying this thing, but I'm just going to have to offend people, unfortunately. But look, we know that what the English did to the Irish was horrible and awful. But unfortunately, what that led to as well was a loss of language. Now there are still obviously some parts that speak it, and you can obviously, if you put the effort in, you can, like your daughter, you can go to schools and so on. But it's not, the national language, so to speak. And I wonder a lot of times, Jim and I talk about identity and the lack of identity, the loss of identity, and I think I've always noticed that when I go to Italy and I really connect with the language again, and I speak Italian to my cousins and this, that, and that, I really feel in that moment I feel more Italian than anyone could ever feel, and I don't feel English anymore. But then sometimes I start to miss English, especially now that I live in Spain. I don't use English as much. I really start to miss it. So then I'll start to watch films or something where I can really listen to the English language and all a Scouse accent, a Geordie accent, a Queen's English, and whatever, and really reconnect with those English roots. And I wonder, do you think that connection that you have with the land that you've spoken about isn't just, with the nature? I mean, that might be one part of it, but also the fact that you have this, the language of your ancestors, and you can actually use that, the language of your soul. And it's not just this notion, old Irish, but you can really use that. You can talk, and you can, like you said here, the magic and Druidery is the same word, and blah blah blah, and all of these little things that reconnect you back to your ancestors. Do you think that plays a big part? And the flip side, do you think that if more Irish people spoke it and were fluent in it, that they'd have a stronger connection to their ancestry?
For me, yes. I mean, Irish will make me cry. It really touches me deeply. And we have a proverb in Irish: "Tír changa, tír anam." A country without its language is a country without its soul.
Hmm.
And I think um, the banning of the Irish language by the English was, I think, very, very unfortunate, including at the end of the 19th century, when they changed the place names from Irish into English. They either phoneticized them or actually did a literal translation. And what that did is it took away the understanding of the meaning of place. I'm a nerd about this. I love looking at roadsides and saying, well, what's the Irish for that? Then I'll know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one, I think, very sad thing that happened. I think the reason people in Ireland have a difficulty with learning language, I mean, we start doing that at 4 or 5 when you go to school, and you do it right through primary school and to secondary school. So it's not as if Irish people are not exposed to the Irish language. But I think with independence, those with the Gaelic revival, those who want to revive the Irish language in schools, they were going to do it properly.
Mm-hmm.
And they became really, really vicious grammarians. And so if you didn't speak it grammatically correct, it was beaten into people. We are not going to be, I mean, the view of the English of the Irish by the English of Irish people was that, we were just lesser beings, hardly human, ineducable, and all of that stuff. So we had to get out of that. We were going to show that we weren't like that, and that we would speak proper Irish, and we would speak it grammatically correct. And that was always the emphasis on it. Now, I had a facility for it, so I didn't have a difficulty with it. And I went to Connemara for my last term in primary school. This is a Gaeltacht area, where I went to a school where children didn't speak English. So I was immersed in it. So I was easy with it. So I was lucky. But for a lot of other people who were stuck on the grammar, and I mean, when we're learning a language, our mother tongue, you don't correct children's grammar. You start off with baby Italian, baby English, baby Irish, whatever it is, and gradually you shape it so that you're actually speaking correctly. But for a long time before you speak correctly, people understand you.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that was it. It was that. Now I think the approach to the teaching of Irish language is much better. It's more conversational. I was lucky with the teacher I had in primary school. We had lots of conversations. We could make up stories. And I think that was just luck. And then I had my secondary school teacher from the Gaeltacht. She taught me French, and I've no French. I can read it, but I can't hear it because it was all Os Gaeilge through Irish. Mm-hmm. So I think people now in Irish are beginning to appreciate it more. It's now become more popular. There's Darach O'Shea, who's written a book, Mother Folklore, and he does what's the Gaeilge for? He has a podcast. There's Moncan McGann, another interesting character who researches Irish language, and when I hear him, it's like, I'm tingly. It's like he just animates the Irish language again, as does Darach O'Shea. So it's coming back. And even my daughter, who won't speak Irish in school, even though it's a Gael school, she likes to break the rules, but she says she will speak it outside, elsewhere.
Mm.
In another country, she'll speak it. She's beginning to appreciate it. And what's really interesting, because initially she said it's a dead language. It's not a dead language. In DCU, one of the universities in Dublin, I think they have 5 or 6 courses, not in the arts humanities department, in the Irish language. But they're not, but there could be engineering, they're technology courses, but they're Os Gaeilge. And that is really interesting. And it is one of the official languages of the EU. So I would hope it can come back more, because there's a magic in the language. I've learned so much about Druidery through looking at Irish. It's such a very poetic language. I also learned Italian. I took it up 5 years ago. So mi piace il lingua. And
We've got
I go to Italy a lot, and I have friends in Italy whose English isn't great, so I speak Italian. And that drives me, it just tingles as well. I just love the Italian language, and I only took it up. I've never been to a class. I learned it on Duolingo and speaking it with my friends. And it's fascinating, because like Italian expresses itself in a way, or words or meaning in a way that English doesn't, and Irish does it in a way that no other language does it. So I think it's an important one.
Yeah, I really think, I mean, through just my own travels and my own experiences with language, I truly believe that, like, you can't get to know a place or a culture until you understand the language. And I'm not saying like you have to be fluent in it, but you just start to at least converse, or even just understand it. Maybe not even speak it, but just to be able to understand it. And I mean, Jim spent a bit of time out in Italy with his girlfriend, and he, obviously, before he ever went out there, I would tell him things about my childhood or whatever, my upbringing, and they probably seemed a bit alien to Jim at the time. And then actually, when he was out there, he would send me a text every now and again and say, "Oh man, I understand why your dad did this, or why you grew up doing this, or why blah blah blah." Because he was, and it wasn't just the fact that he was in Italy; it's the fact that the language is like, it's almost like the key that opens the door to then Pandora's box. And I felt like, and I love Ireland, I really do. And when I visited Jim, it was such a great time in Ireland, but I did feel like I was missing something. And even though the Irish people, I always say they speak English in a far more romantic way than the English do, that I just felt like, maybe it's because I'm a language fanaticist, but I just felt like, there's something here that I'm not unlocking. I wonder, is that part of is that what drew you also to Druidery? That connection with language and history? Was that important for you?
I didn't know when I started looking at Druidery that it would offer me such a connection back to the language. I discovered the magic of that then, because when I started secondary school, I was almost fluent in Irish because of having been to Connemara. And then I left secondary school, and then I didn't use Irish. So I lost it. It had gone asleep. And what Druidery, when it started, there was an Irish program, Furn-G, I think, where they paired towns in Ireland, and they wanted them to start speaking Irish. So there was a competition. And Freshford is a village near where I live. It was paired with Cong, and I was asked if I would do a summer solstice ceremony in Irish. And I did for it, but they didn't show it on the film. But anyway, but that really pushed me into, why aren't I running my ceremonies in Irish? And I started. So it was Druidery got me back to Irish.
So, Jim, I'd love to know like your thoughts on this and the Irish language, and how you feel it ties in with identity and connection.
There's a truly beautiful aspect to uncovering a culture through a language. like it can't be quite put into words, but I think you and Seb have done a much better job than myself. Just reflecting now, I guess it's a source of like quasi shame that I've experienced some of this uncovering to Spanish and Italian, but not Irish. I am motivated to really invest time into Irish language. Like I think there's so much spiritual weight to it. But I guess I'm wondering, do you think this barrier to the Irish language has previously prevented Irish people gravitating towards Druidery? And in the past, and why do you think Druidery membership is rapidly rising over the last few years?
Well, the order was founded. Wait a second. Now it's 56 years ago by Ross Nichols, and there might have been 20 people. And then Philip, my predecessor in the order, Philip Cargom, when he took over as chosen chief of the order in 1988, there were about 10, 20 people. There are now over 25,000. And in 2020, the numbers, the numbers of new membership has risen hugely. There's a huge spike. I suppose there are many reasons why. So we've 25,000, over 25,000 members worldwide. Now that's probably the largest order in the world. That's quite, for Druidery, that's quite a lot. And it has resonances for people all over the world, on all of the continents, not just people from the so-called Celtic lands. So why has it increased? I think the monotheistic, dogmatic religions have, for many people, have lost meaning. So there are people who do not want authoritarian dogma. And Druidery offers that. It's a way of allowing you to explore yourself personally and to explore yourself spiritually and to explore your relationship with the land. I think that is an important one. Also, maybe with all of the climate change and climate emergency that's being discussed all the time, people may feel actually this might be something that might answer a need for meaning. And also because it allows, you can still be a Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, and you can be a Druid. It allows for different worldviews. So you can believe in one God, many gods, no God. It doesn't matter. You can be an animist. It's that. So it's almost like it provides a container for any odd bod. As long as you have those core values, you have a Druid's prayer that was written in the 18th century by Iolo Morgannwg, who was a Welsh Druid, and it's grant, O Spirit, thy protection, and in protection strength, and in strength understanding, and in understanding knowledge, and in knowledge the knowledge of justice, and in the knowledge of justice the love of it, and in the love of it the love of all existences, and in the love of all existences the love of spirit and all goodness. So you can find there are lots of values. It's a modern prayer, as in, it's not an ancient one. The Druids didn't write down their beliefs. We only have accounts from the Romans and the Christian monks. But we know from the stories about their love of nature and the roles they performed, and it's kind of encapsulated in that prayer. And I think the values in that prayer, the love of justice, the love of all existences, and spirit, I think is resonating with people in a very deep way in these times. And I suppose the pandemic, people are looking for meaning. People are looking for some spiritual practice or worldview to help sustain them at this time. I imagine that's one of the reasons as well.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think because I think right now is a time where most people are trying to use it to reset or at least to evaluate decisions and lifestyle choices that we've made up until now. And has that worked for us? And when we kind of come out of this, whenever that may be, can we improve that, or do we want to carry on as we're going on? And you talked about agency beforehand, and I think people have felt they thought that they might have had control with certain life choices that they'd made, and then they've realized that actually that was all kind of farcical. And there might be a different way, and that's why I think even buttoned up Brits are looking for more alternative ways to kind of traverse life, and I think that's why that's why we've got you on the podcast, and we will try to speak to as many different people as possible, because the more you find out, the more you can kind of incorporate different things from different, whether it's a belief system, a culture, a country, or wherever it may be. And I really like the fact that in Druidery you can actually maintain a certain identity that you may have had beforehand and don't want to give up, and actually still incorporate into Druidry and become a druid. How, for someone who is listening to this and going, that seems really interesting, I want to find out more, and maybe they're not from Ireland, or maybe it's not so easy, that connection, how can they find out more about where they could connect or how they could form part of it?
Okay, well, we have a website,
Mm-hmm.
www.druidery.org, and there's lots and lots of information about Druidery itself. There's if people want to sign up for it's a mystery school, so it's a teaching order,
Uh-huh.
and it's a course by distance. And soon we're going, what is it, online. Up to now, it's been a paper sent out on the post, the lessons.
Uh-huh.
So you can get an introductory pack, and if it sits well with you, then you can sign up for the course. There are 3 grades. You start at the Bardic, and then you go on to the Ovid, if you so choose. You get lessons every month for a year, and you're not expected to finish it in a year, but that's the duration of the lessons that get disseminated, and
Right.
you work on them at your own pace. And we also provide them a mentorship. So
Uh-huh.
included in that is you get a mentor. You apply for a mentor, and who can support you as you continue through the lessons. So
Perfect. And I wanted to ask as well, because you briefly touched on the fact that it's something that I really found quite interesting when I was researching about Druidry, is that Druids back in the day, they never actually wrote anything down. Kind of almost adds to the mystique, and anything we do know is secondhand, like you said, from the Romans. And I always wonder how much they actually really understood. When, but for someone who maybe has done research into what Druidry was in its original form, let's say, is and maybe they've dismissed it on that basis, or whatever the case may be, is it the more modern form? You said it's done 50, 60 years ago. Is there a real link there, or is it a lot more? Is it different? How similar are the two
okay,
things?
I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
The there was a Druid revival in the 1700s. I think it was 1771. It's almost like a mark a year, and you had 3 criteria: you need to be male, a Mason, and a Christian. And it was, and the notion of Druids being long-haired white guys with long beards,
Yeah.
and so they went back to looking at old descriptions of what Druids were, and so it's over 300 years old. This modern Druidry.
Uh-huh.
Orders express themselves differently, like I suppose different churches. And what I like about Druidry is that we can look as much as we can to the past and to we'll say the text, particularly by the Irish monks. You get a sense of them. We don't know what rituals they did. But we know they honored the sun, nature. They were judges. They were storytellers. They were healers. They were musicians, poets. They got inspiration from the goddess and the land and the landscape, and the elements were very, very important in nature. We know all of that. So today, Druidry it's an organic spiritual path that's relevant for today. So it's not stuck and locked in and preserved in formaldehyde in the past. It's about a spiritual path that has a relevance for today. So
Right.
we can look to the past and see what resonates with us today, and see what else we can and do our own thinking. And with meditation, we can find a practice. For me, like, I learn a lot from the landscape. It speaks to me, and
Uh-huh.
trees. And I assume that's what the ancient Druids experienced as well, when the landscape spoke to them or trees spoke to them.
Yeah.
So it's a living, growing spiritual path.
I suppose in one way, I mean, it's a benefit, isn't it, compared to the more traditional religions, is that you have that agility to kind of morph and adapt, and to be able to, like you said, not have a list of 10 commandments or whatever it may be, and be like, we have to stick to this book which is 1,500 years old, and this is what it is, and this is how it is, and that's that. I wonder. You talk about the landscape, and obviously it's clearly vital for Druidery and that connection with land, and nature. But you yourself know, obviously, having lived in Dublin for a period of time and not wanting to move back to the rural landscapes. I live in Madrid. Jim's currently in Dublin, and most of our listeners, I would assume, are in cities. How can someone who is maybe interested in Druidery, or just not even Druidery, but just connecting with nature again, how would you recommend that they do so, where maybe it's not at their, it's not so easy, it's not so accessible for them?
That's a really good question. One of the earliest teachings we have within the order is around establishing your own sacred grove, and that's an inner grove. So a lot of the work as a druid, a lot of the training is your inner work, your own inner landscape, finding that place, finding that still center within your being, within a grove of trees, however, and you view it, you create it in your own mind, and exercises so that that's what I really liked about Cassandra Eason's book when she said you can be in a city and you can create a physical grove with 4 pot plants, and then there's
Hmm.
also your inner grove, so that no matter where you are, you can, as a druid, enter your grove. It's on the inner plane. And
Right.
when I was talking about, for me, it's like when I look to the landscape, and if my inner landscape is at one with the outer landscape, then there's harmony and balance. And it's easy for me because I'm just looking out my window now and I can see the landscape. Where in a city, you're seeing concrete and traffic and all of that. Sometimes that's a little bit
Yeah.
harder, but you can still do it. You can still do that on the inner plane. And okay, maybe you can go to parks, but even, having a window box, putting your hand in the earth in a window box, that is earth connection. Uh,
Right.
um, being more mindful of the water you drink, where you get it, but even going to a park, looking at plants, noticing um, the birds, the plants. I was interviewing on one of my fireside chats. I do these on a Thursday evening. Um, Ricky Gellison was a guest of mine 2 weeks ago, and he's London based. Well, he's not, he's Kent, but he belongs to a grove in London. And his grove have managed to find key sites in London, for example, that are sacred. And they run ceremonies there. And Ross Nichols, our founder, he used to do it in Primrose Hill. So
Hmm.
that and there's the magic, is about being able to find the mystery, the magic, the spirit of place in Madrid, in
Yeah.
Dublin, in wherever you are, in London, and to find that. And I remember reading an account of somebody who's in solitary confinement, and they had a tiny window up at the top, and they were able to look out. And the one thing that sustained them, they could see a tree. It was one
Hmm.
tree, and they connected with that tree, and that is what sustained them. So it's about finding that lifeline, that place of connection. I mean, I see you've got a plant behind you, a trailing plant.
Yeah.
Supposing you couldn't go outside your door now because of whatever's happening,
Hmm.
there's your connection with nature.
Got you.
So that no matter, and this is where the agency comes in, even though you can't be deep in the forest right now, you still have agency, you still have a choice, you can still connect, because that pot plant is as valuable as the forest. Like each one of us is valuable. So whatever tiny, humble, small little plant, flower, bird, they're all important. And it's about recognizing that and having that connection with them wherever you are.
I've got one last question because I know Jim's got a few backed up there. You've mentioned that there, and you just literally touched on it right at the end. You said about the bird, and I wanted to ask you, if you have a pet, is that, can you connect there as well? Is there a form of connection with an animal, or does it have to strictly be kind of a plant based, more nature, so to
There's
speak?
no rules. If your connection is with your pet dog, your pet bird, your pet mouse, kitten, whatever it is, that's what's important. Because the plants are valuable, the animals, it's everybody is of value, and it's how you each. This is what's lovely about Druidery, is that how do you connect with nature? You do it. I do it through trees. That's really
Hmm.
That's my medicine. I
Yeah.
like mountains, I like the seas, but really I need trees. For
Hmm.
you, it could be horses. Somebody else is something else. You have your own way of engaging with nature. That it provides the key or the conduit to connect with the natural
Got you.
world, and you have that
Per-
freedom to do that.
Perfect. Okay, Jim, it's all yours now. I'll take a step back.
I love you describing your communication with trees and the wind. And I'm even reminded of an interview I watched last week where the woman spoke of a song that was given to her by the river. I can't help but think maybe we have lost an ability to communicate with nature, which now sounds more absurd than intuitive.
It's I don't think it's been lost. Just think it's asleep. It's like if you so you're in Dublin now and you cross a Connell Bridge and you see the Liffey and she's not saying anything to you. Of course she's not, because you're busy crossing the thing and there's traffic and everything else. But if you actually go and sit beside a river and wait and see what happens, uh, if you've got your headphones in, you're not going to hear anything. If you're in the woods and you've got a headset in, it's around leaving yourself open. My fireside chat last night, I was in conversation with Frank Martinez, who lives in Eureka in California, and he lives in redwood country, and the trees talk to him. And somebody asked in the chat, how long did it take before they would speak to you? And he said he's been doing this all his life, and it's around just opening yourself up with no investment in the outcome. But it's like, I am now going to sit beside this river and I'm going to listen, or I'm going to watch. I'm going to watch how the river flows. I'm going to look at the little eddies, looking to see what's passing by, looking how fast are there little waves, and wait to experience it. That's what the Druids and the bards of old did, as they sat beside the rivers and received the imas, that inspiration. Or we also, another word is a little different, is aiksha, getting that wisdom, that creativity from the landscape. So I think it's about opening yourself up, and it's quieting your mind and waiting in a very patient way for them, for nature to speak to you. But it's a bit like if you have the radio on and you're not listening and you're in another room, um, you're not going to hear anything. So it's about switching it on. It's not lost. It's there. They're just waiting for you to turn up.
I'm looking forward to reawakening this for myself. Can I ask how you combine your reverence, knowledge, and relationship with the natural world with your work as a psychologist?
Well, that's an interesting one. When I trained, this was pre Google, uh, pre able to look up every, and you were meant to, as a psychologist, as a psychotherapist, blank screen. Nobody knew anything about you. You didn't reveal anything about your private life, so that you were this neutral person providing a safe environment for the client to work on whatever it was important to them. And now with Google, I know people Google me. So they'll say, I Googled you and I realized you're the right person for me, which tells me that other people have Googled me and they go, absolutely no way. So I don't talk about being a druid. I don't talk because that's the idea is you don't influence anybody. All right. And in my training, we were told you leave spirituality to the priests. You just deal with the psyche stuff. And of course, I found that people were bringing up spiritual issues. And now, because people Google and check everybody out before they go to anybody, they know she's a druid. So it'll, I won't bring it up. It'll come up itself. But also, um, it's sometimes I'll ask a question: what feeds your spirit? I don't say, do you go to mass? Do you pray on a mat? It's like, what feeds your spirit? And then eventually, invariably it'll come up. I like walking in the woods. Well, what happens to you when you walk in the woods? Well, actually, I feel X, Y, and Z. I feel so much better. I feel if I go for a long walk, my depression lifts. So it's not overt. It's there, and it comes up in a conversation. So when the client brings it up, then we can have an exploration of the importance of nature. But it's always what they think and from their perspective. So I don't preach it, as it were. And I work from home. So when people, they have to drive out to see me, I'm in a rural area, and they come up my driveway and they go around my garden. And then as they're waiting to come inside my office door. They're standing at the doorstep, looking over the garden, looking at the river. And that's that. So they're immersed in a nature space before they even come into the room. And often that will, so it's there in my practice environment is nature, that they see it without having to say anything. Does that answer? So that's how it is. It's subtle, as in not sneaky, but it's a subtle presence there.
How do you think going forward? What do you think the movement will how will it evolve? How can you see this going forwards as we go to the future? You said that your numbers are starting to go up, and that you're already at 25,000. Do you, when these people who are enlisting, are they? Is there a is there a profile that they're fitting? Are they younger? Are they women? Are they men? Is there a specific trend?
I haven't looked at that, so I couldn't tell you. But what's really interesting because of this pandemic is that we are now, I do these fireside chats online. So they go out, they're live streamed every Thursday on a YouTube and Facebook. Philip Cargon, my predecessor, he does these teas with the Druid on a Monday night. And we've started running some of our rituals to mark the Wheel of the Year online. This has never happened before. So the teas had started maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I started the fireside chats in the autumn. So now what's happening is that more and more people are watching who are not members of the order. So people are, and I get messages from people saying, I'm not a member, but I was just blown away by this. I really loved your ceremony, or I liked the chat. It's really interesting to listen to Druids speaking about their lives. So in a sense, something is unfolding that I would not have expected.
Yeah.
And you think pandemic, what a terrible thing that has happened to the world. This is one silver lining, that it's reaching out to people. So I get messages from even members who say, I'm a solitary Druid. I'm in the middle of Nebraska, for example, and I don't know any other Druids. And this is the first time I've been able to take part in a ceremony, and it's wonderful. It's lovely to meet people online. So the online, for all its failings, has actually, in this time of physical isolation, has opened itself up to people. So people spiritually can actually connect with other people, and it's opening it to non-Druids. And that's really, really interesting. So it'll be, I've no idea, because if you told me a year ago, would I be running rituals online, I'd have said, no, they're inappropriate. You can't do that. And all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And now I discovered that you can have a really deep experience. For example, the handing over ceremony, when I became head of the order last June, that was done online. There was a pre-recorded ceremony. And I was sitting in my sitting room, and I was right there in my inner world, feeling the handover of the energy from Philip to myself. Really profound. I could never have predicted that. And so we're discovering, with all this physical isolation, I'm not suggesting it's better than the real thing. It is not. I'm hoping to get and stand in a circle with people physically, but that we are making the best of a really difficult situation. And in fact, the online stuff is broadening it out to people. So who knows what's going to unfold from this going forward? That it's open.
Yeah. I know, and I think, like you said, it's a silver lining, and it shows, like you said, you would have dismissed it beforehand, but the fact that you kind of been forced to play that hand is now something that you could maybe incorporate going forwards, even when this all lifts. That would open you up to other communities that beforehand wouldn't be available to you, obviously, because you were based in a certain place and it had to all be done in person. So I mean, it's definitely a benefit. Talking about years, it just brings me on to one last question, which we forgot to ask. We should have asked beforehand. Could you just talk to us about the Druidy calendar and how that improves the alignment with nature?
Well, we have a Wheel of the Year now. So we've just had Imbolc at the beginning of February. And that marks, in Ireland, it's the first day of spring. Nobody ever agrees. I think the rest of the world doesn't agree with this. But this is the time when, I suppose, the first signs of life and new growth is just coming up. The shoots are just beginning to peep up from the surface, and we have our snowdrops. And Imbolc means, or the old Irish word is oimelc, meaning ewe's milk. This is the time when the lambs are born. And Imbolc or Imbolc means in the belly, so refers to the womb. And Bridget is the triple goddess. She comes at this time, or is honored in her maiden aspect, but also for Christians, Saint Bridget is honored at this time. So it's a time of hope. Bridget is the goddess of fire and water, so she's bringing with her this new light, heading forward into the year. And then we come up to the spring equinox. And our ancient ancestors, now we're going back to our megalithic ancestors, our Neolithic ancestors, there are a number of passage tombs and even stone circles, etc., that are aligned to the equinoxes. So the solar fence, so we have the equinoxes at March and September, and then we have the solstices in June and December. So those ancient monuments are aligned to those. And then Imbolc, Bealtaine, which is in May, Lunasa, August, and Samhain, which is in November. These may have been seen as fire festivals or agricultural festivals. So,
Right.
And they're Celtic. The megalithic ones are pre-Celtic. But in modern paganism, it's not just Druidery, but also Wicca and other pagans mark the wheel of the year. They've actually brought those two traditions together to create a wheel. So when we come into the spring equinox, this is the time for planting seeds. And when you do that in the landscape. So
Of
St.
course.
Patrick's Day was the day for planting potatoes in Ireland and for pruning your roses. So that's close to the equinox. You plant seeds. So when we're doing our ceremonies, we have a seed planting ceremony, and it's planting a seed in your inner. We physically do one. Okay, literally, we plant a seed in a pot, but also we're sowing seeds within for something we would like to grow, to germinate in our own lives. It could be, I just want to be a bit tidier, or I want to be more patient, or it could be, you know what, I'm going to take on some study, or I want to complete something. And you nurture that plant
Right.
in the external world, but also you're paying attention to it and feeding it on your inner world.
Okay.
So that you come up to Bealtaine, Beltane in England, is when everything is abundant. There's this huge surge of sexual energy and growth in the landscape. And you look at these feminine and masculine principles and you bring those together to create things. And you're paying attention to what it is you've sown in March and allowing it
Right.
to grow. And then we follow, then we reach the pinnacle at the solstice, where the sun's power reaches its height. And then the paradox is, as soon as it reaches the highest point, it begins to decline. And then we come into Lunasa, which is the early harvest. And then September is the mid-harvest. And then Samhain, Halloween, is the time where we honor the ancestors. It marks the end of summer, the beginning of winter. It's the time of drawing in. Bridget in her Cailleach form, the crone form, comes at that time and wipes clean the landscape to prepare it for winter, for the stillness and restriction of winter, where the seeds become embedded and they need that cold, frosty time of stillness to rest, and then they germinate again in spring at this time we are now.
Interesting stuff.
And then
Interesting.
the winter solstice marks and then again you have, you see, typical like Newgrange, Stonehenge. We have a sacred site near us here in Kilkenny called Knockrow, where there are two passage tombs aligned to the winter solstice, one at the sunrise, one at the sunset. So once we've passed that point, the days get longer, the light is growing, it's a time of hope. Where prior to that, we're in the dark, we mourn for what's gone, we stay still.
Right.
And it's interesting with lockdown is that we've had to stay within, that we're more, this year has I'm more in tune with my landscape because I'm here all the time. I'm not busy.
Of course.
Traveling
Yeah, of
everywhere.
course.
So
Yeah.
I could withdraw into the dark time of the year and stay still, which is
Right.
more at one with the landscape than if I had been normally busy. So I've looked to here as a gift. I'm dying to get back out again. I can't wait to meet my friends. But it's also been a really good lesson in staying with the landscape, both my inner and my outer.
Beautiful stuff. I mean, thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really interesting, and found out so much new information that we had no idea about. Before we let you go, we have to ask. We ask all of our guests how you keep on top of your mental health. What are your little kind of tricks of the trade that you help? I think you've alluded to some of them with the trees, but for anyone who's listening who might try to steal some of your little tricks, what could you share with us?
I'm happy to share walking. So I walk in the woods, my trees, meditation. I read. I play the harp.
Mm-hmm.
I tell stories. Um, I cook. Um, I like looking after my nutrition. So time in the garden. And when things get, and I get pissed off or I'm just stressed, it's like, okay, breathe.
Yeah.
Just follow my breath. It's as simple as that. And that can actually just ground me in the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that this will pass and that
Yeah.
accepting there's nothing I can do about this now, but I can decide to take a breath. I can decide to go make myself a cup of tea,
Yeah.
or that's all that matters, and leave. It's almost like recognizing what I cannot control and leaving it and say, okay, well, I'll deal with that when I can do it. It's what can I do now?
Perfect.
And talking to friends, staying in connection with people. I think that's really, really important.
I agree. Yeah, especially now. I obviously I live in Madrid, and a lot of my friends are back home. Well, I say back home. Madrid is my home now, but back in England, and I make a conscious effort to contact them, call them, FaceTime them, whatever it may be, just to stay connected and not let distance be the reason that our friendship breaks down. So I think that's a huge key. I know you mentioned your website beforehand, but for people who want to find some more information, we'll put the website in the show notes. But could you just give it to us one more time?
It's www.druidery.org.
There you go. Couldn't have it any easier than that. Druidery.org, guys. So thank you so much for your time, Eimear. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. And we hope that people who've listened have maybe learned something that they didn't know beforehand, and maybe even get in contact with you via your website. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Great. Thank you. Lovely. I really enjoyed talking to the two of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you haven't already. Every review helps us climb the podcast charts so that even more of you can listen to our amazing guests. We really appreciate the support. Remember to tune in next week. But until then, keep safe and have a good one.